Political affairs analyst Nweke and international journalist Timi both joins me now on Nigeria Tonight for further analysis of the president's speech. Let me start with you, Mr. Nweke. You were on this bulletin on Monday and you predicted on how the president's first outing will turn out. How happy are you with yourself for being some sort of prophet? And what are those areas of the president's speech that stood out for you?
Thank you, Felicity, for having me. Well, I didn't do anything exceptional. I think essentially we looked at what the president has been saying all along. I mean, starting from when he was seeking the office of president, and then his body language since assuming office on 29th of May, and so it was perhaps possible to predict what he was going to say, and yes, he didn't fail. Now, I would want to assess his performance from what we call the tripod of assessment of political communications, and there are three major areas to look at in general terms. You look at intent. What was the intention? I mean, in terms of intent, I think I will score him somewhere around 7.5, over 10%. Now, in terms of content itself, it was nearly perfect because, I mean, I will give him some 9 out of 10. And then, if you also look at the chronology of, presentation, how each point actually, led to the other, and so you can run a thread across the 5 points that, he put on the table, you will see that there was a very systematic chronology. And so he did pretty well there as well. Now, generally speaking, I believe that it was a much forward-looking speech. Now, there were references to the past, but those were to the extent that the past helped to inform the future that he wants to see, not just for Nigeria, of which is the president, but also for Africa, specifically the West African sub-region, where he is currently the chairman.
I know if I let you, you will speak a little further. We'll come back to you in a bit, but let's bring in Mr. Frank. You have observed the president, President Tinubu, from the time he arrived in the United States till now. What will you say was behind the overwhelming confidence he exuded last night when he took the stand? Hello, Mr. Frank, can you hear me?
Thank you much for having me. Good evening. I think my own view of the first outing of the president in the United Nations, for me, I think first of all, I saw the 5 points he spoke about, and I think in my own view, in one of those 5 points agenda he talked about, I think it's also part of the problems within the continent of Africa. And it's very clear that Africa today, our leaders, whenever they come to United Nations, they speak and sweet talk the world as if they are democratic leaders who came through the ballot of the people. But again, I will tell you clearly, majority of the leaders in Africa, majority of the president, including President Tinubu, is part of the reason why we have coups today in Africa. I know he talked about the coup, but he did not tell the world and the United Nations why we always have coup in recent time in Africa.
All right, Mr. Frank, we'll come back to you in a bit. Let's stride back to Mr. Nweke. President Tinubu drew a parallel between Africa's challenges and the post-war Marshall Plan in Europe. Could you elaborate on the key distinctions he emphasized and what kind of response is needed from the international community? If you can make it a bit concise, please.
Yes. Essentially, he started with an indictment of Africa in terms of actually owning up to the fact that Africa has performed abysmally in the last period. He linked, the incessant coup, to it in the period that he's been president, just very short period, two, have actually happened. So he condemned all of those, but indeed, like Timi Frank was, trying to say, he didn't, condemn the civilian coup that happened, because when, bad governance is the order of the day and people get into office by all manner of manipulations and all of that, you have also committed civilian coup. Now, moving away from that, he then also indicted the Western governments, for instance, not honoring their commitments, for example, on climate change, but also the way the financial institutions are tilted against Africa, that makes things, not really work as it should be. And so, after admonishing them, he then eventually talked about the shared prosperity, not because Africa is, a beggar case, but that the shared prosperity is good for Africa, but also for the West, because Africa is the next frontier. Now, those were not hollow words. He gave a number of examples to actually confirm the fact from his perspective that Africa is, the future, both for Africa and the West.
All right, let's come back to you, Mr. Frank. We hear that the U.S. President Joe Biden has extended an invitation to President Tinubu for a meeting. As we hear, the only African leader to be so honored. From your understanding of both countries, what do you think this meeting will focus on?
Well, right now, I don't know if there is any meeting or side meeting within the United States president and the Nigerian president. As I speak, up to this minute, that meeting has not held. From my finding and investigation and understanding, President Biden is already in Washington, D.C. So I don't know if that meeting is going to be in Washington, D.C. or is going to be in New York. So there is no meeting anywhere. There's no discussion anywhere.
Okay.
I just think this is just mere, but anyway, let's even agree that there was meant to be a meeting. What is so special within meeting the president of America and the president of Nigeria? There's nothing special. Nigeria is a sovereign country.
Some would actually argue with you, but we appreciate the clarity there that you do not have information on how that meeting is supposed to happen, especially, as you said, if Mr. Okay, I think I lost my thread of thoughts there. Something was whispered to me. Let me just go straight to Mr. Nweke. There is something President Tinubu did last night that has been in scarce supply over the years, and that is speaking for the entire continent. He asserted that we are not beggars, but equal partners with geopolitical blocs of the world. He went ahead to demand greater commitment from the advanced countries in solving global problems. Talk us through what these statements should mean to Africa and her leaders.
What that statement means for Africa is the fact that in the past, there was a clean break from the past in terms of presenting Africa as that sorry case that has nothing to offer the world. Essentially, he is saying that Africa brings a lot to the table and that the opportunities should be seen. And that is not surprising because one of his key foreign policy doctrine is demography. Now, demography in his own interpretation is actually talking about the young population of Africa when you look at the population pyramid, which means that as the West is growing, Africa is getting younger. And so the workforce of the future is actually deposited in Africa. He is inviting the world to take advantage of that. So that is an opportunity that he sees. And when he talked about the Marshall Plan, I think to some extent, he, is actually referring to that. So the shared prosperity, he is talking about the Western world coming to take advantage of the good things that are happening in Africa, but it's got to be done in an atmosphere of equality, but also equity. The inequities of the past, he wants a clean break from those. But in the end, Felicity, what has to happen is to get some matching actions to these words that he has spoken. Immediately he returns back to Nigeria, and it is not surprising that he spoke on behalf of Africa, because that unique situation that he met, coming in, 2 coups happening that he had to deal with, and then talking tough, but then seeing the opposition, against the position that he took, and then he took a few steps backwards and, devoted time now to diplomacy.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nweke. Quick, in 30 seconds, if you can, Timi, I'd like you to speak on the summit is still going to hold. We want you to, what do you want African leaders to spend time focusing on in the remaining days as quickly as you can, please?
Well, I think African leaders should do the needful in making sure there should be proper partnership within the continent of Africa and the Western world. African leaders must not come here, say something today and do something different. Practically, they've contradicted themselves in the speech President Tinubu gave. If you say we are equal partners, then why will African leaders come to the United Nations, to World Bank, and to IMF, and then coming to beg for aid and all kinds of support? So this is a contradictory statement. Where there's nothing like equal partners. These people, Africa has made them to be more superior than us, and it's our leaders that caused this particular, scenario, because they survived through Africa. They come to Africa Timi, to get our resources, our oil and our gold. So
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we're out of time. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving us your time.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.